Hello, my name is Uma Kollamparambil. I'm a professor of economics and the head of School of Economics and Finance at Wits University. I'm a development economist, fundamentally interested in issues such as migration and inequality. The perspective from which I explore these issues are slightly different. I try to look at them beyond the monetary measures conventionally used by economists such as household income or gross domestic product. Instead, I probe these issues from self-assessed perspectives, and this is called as subjective well-being. The importance of subjective well-being is underlined by the fact that it, rather than income, has been found to be the key predictor of uprisings and civil unrest, such as the Arab Spring we witnessed in Egypt and Tunisia in 2010-2011. That is not to say income is not important. So a key factor what I have been exploring in my research is the relationship between subjective well-being and income inequality. What I found in the South African context is that indeed absolute income is a key factor in determining subjective well-being, but this is at the lower end of the income spectrum, which basically means that the higher end, further increases in income, does not necessarily translate to further increases in subjective well-being. This has implications for policy formulations relating to inequality reductions. Aside from that, what I've seen through my studies more recently is the trend of increasing subjective well-being in South Africa observed immediately following the dawn of democracy and the end of apartheid has now been reversed. We are now witnessing a phase of declining subjective well-being for the last decade or so. And this is observed across the spectrum and is of big concern. Further probing the factors behind declining subjective well-being using the data available for the Gauteng province, what I've found is that it is driven fundamentally by the decline in satisfaction related to public service delivery. And this is observed once again across the income spectrum. The decline in subjective well-being, however, is more so for those at the higher end of the income spectrum, which basically translates to a reduction in subjective well-being inequality within South Africa. But this is not driven by the fact of increasing subjective well-being for those at lower averages, rather than driven by the decline of subjective well-being at the higher end of the average well-being distribution. Further through my studies, I found that it's meaningful to probe the outcomes of policy measures through subjective well-being rather than purely income-related outcomes. For instance, the outcome of land reforms. I've seen that land reforms can result in increased subjective well-being if it is privately owned. Communally owned land does not necessarily translate to subjective well-being. Similarly, you also see dichotomy in the outcomes following migration. Whereas migration results in increased economic outcomes such as income or the likelihood of finding employment for individuals, it also translates to lower subjective well-being upon migration. And this is again of concern given the large proportion of Gauteng population who are migrants. It is therefore a pointer for government to formulate policies to facilitate better integration of migrants into the urban spaces, or better still, create conditions in the rural regions where migration is not forced upon individuals. My goal for South Africa would be for government to record and report on an annual basis at a national level subjective well-being in the form of gross national happiness, just as we do for gross domestic product. And other countries such as Bhutan, New Zealand, etc. are templates where it can be done and it can be a final outcome and objective of government performance and policies. Thank you.